John was a soldier, stationed on a remote planet far from Earth. The mission was simple: assist the Xelians, a highly advanced alien species with their growing security problems. But what he never expected was to find himself in the middle of a life-or-death moment. The Xelian princess, Lyra, was leading a diplomatic mission to a nearby colony to strengthen the alliance between humans and Xelians. She was young, brave, and had the determination of someone who was destined to rule. John had met her only a few times, but he admired her strength. They were from different worlds. He was a human soldier with a simple purpose, and she was a royal, carrying the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. That day, they were part of a larger gathering held in the heart of the Xelian capital. Leaders from both human and Xelian forces were present. The room buzzed with discussions of strategy, future alliances, and trade agreements. Lyra, as usual, stood confidently at the center of the gathering, listening carefully to each leader's words. But not everyone in the room was friendly. Among the guests, there were hidden enemies, those who had no interest in peace. They believed that the Xylian royal family had grown weak, and they intended to do something about it. John had been standing by Lyra, quietly observing. His hand rested lightly on his weapon, his instincts always alert. He had been trained for this, ready for any danger. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen. A figure in the crowd moved quickly, slipping through the shadows. A sharp glint caught John's Aja blade, aimed directly at Lyra. Time seemed to slow as John's military training kicked in. Without thinking, he lunged forward, pushing the princess aside with all his strength. The blade sliced through the air, striking him across the chest. Pain shot through his body, but he barely registered it. His only thought was that he had to protect her, no matter the cost. Lyra gasped in shock as John collapsed to the ground. Blood poured from his wound, staining the polished floor beneath him. The room erupted into chaos, but Lyra didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the soldier who had just saved her life. "Get a medic." Someone shouted, but the noise seemed distant. John could hear the murmurs of concern around him, but his focus was on Lyra. She knelt beside him, her face pale with fear and confusion. "John," she said, her voice cracking. "Why? Why did you do this?" John tried to smile, though it felt weak. "It was my job," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't let you, she." "Don't talk," she interrupted, panic rising in her voice. "You'll be fine. We'll get you help." But John knew better. His vision was starting to blur, and the pain in his chest was becoming unbearable. He could feel the life draining from him, but he didn't want Lyra to see him like this. Just make sure. He gasped for breath, trying to form the words. "Make sure they don't succeed." "What? Who? What are you talking about?" she asked urgently, holding him tighter. "Your people," he whispered, his words slurring. "They're in danger." Lyra looked around at the chaos in the room. She could see her advisors rushing to her, but the panic in their eyes mirrored her own. A wave of guilt washed over her. She had been so focused on the peace talks, on the future of her people, that she hadn't noticed the danger creeping in. Now she was losing a man who had risked everything for her. "I will protect you, John," she vowed, her eyes locked onto his. "I swear I will." He smiled weakly, feeling the edges of his consciousness slip away. The next few minutes were a blur. Lyra didn't leave his side, even as the medics arrived. They worked quickly to stabilize him, but John's condition was dire. It was unclear if he would survive, but the life-threatening injury was serious enough that the whole room fell into a heavy silence. The Xylian leaders, once consumed with their discussions, now stood still, watching the soldier who had just thrown himself in front of death to protect their princess. The situation had taken a dark turn. No one had expected this. "John." Lyra's voice was trembling now, but there was no question in her tone. "You saved my life. You saved us all." His body was carried away to a nearby medical bay, but Lyra couldn't shake the weight of his words. She felt a strange sense of responsibility, a growing knot in her chest. His sacrifice wasn't something that could be easily repaid. In Xelian culture, when someone saved the life of royalty, it wasn't simply an act of gratitude. It was an unbreakable bond, a connection that demanded something more. Lyra knew what that meant, and it terrified her. A life debt could not be ignored. John had given his life to protect hers. But in return, the life debt was a tradition that carried a heavy cost. It meant that John's life was now tied to hers, and Lyra would be bound by duty to repay that debt. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than either of them could have ever imagined. In the quiet of the medbay, Lyra sat beside John's bed. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the room, but her mind was elsewhere. What would happen next? What was she supposed to do now? Her culture had a rule in ancient tradition that when a royal life was saved, it was not just a debt, it was a bond, one that transcended politics and even blood. The Xilian royal family had never been put in this position before, at least not in her lifetime. What did it mean for her future? And what did it mean for John, the soldier who had thrown his life away for a stranger? As the hours passed, Lyra's resolve hardened. She would repay this life debt, no matter what it cost. John had saved her life. Now it was her turn to save him, and perhaps more than that. The days following John's injury were filled with uncertainty. His body had been patched up, but the doctors were unsure how long it would take for him to recover. Lyra never left his side, watching him as he slept, her mind racing with the consequences of what had just happened. John had saved her life. Now she was bound by an ancient Xilian tradition. The Xilian people had strict rules when it came to life debts. If someone saved the life of a royal, especially a princess, it wasn't just a simple act of gratitude. It was a serious bond that connected both parties in ways no one could easily understand. According to tradition, the person who had saved a royal's life was entitled to something far greater than mere thanks. Lyra sat in the quiet of her chambers that evening, reflecting on what had happened. She knew that the rules of her people were clear. The life debt was not something to be taken lightly. It could mean that John would be given a title, a land of his own, or even a seat in the royal council. The Xilian leaders had already begun, whispering about the next steps. Discussing what role John would play in the future of the empire, the thought weighed heavily on Lyra's mind. She wasn't sure what to make of it. She had never imagined that a human soldier, someone from a different world, would ever become so important to her people. She had been raised to think of humans as allies, but now she saw them in a new light. John wasn't just an ally. He was her protector, her savior, and now, the person whose life was intertwined with hers through a sacred tradition. Lyra stood up, pacing across the room. She needed answers. The life debt tradition was sacred, but it was also complicated. What did it mean for her to repay this debt? And what would John think when he woke up and found out what the Xilian people expected of him? The next morning, Lyra stood beside John's bed as he slowly opened his eyes. He blinked several times, trying to focus. His chest still ached, but the pain was bearable now. When he saw her standing there, his mind began to clear. "Lyra?" he whispered, his voice weak. "How are you?" She smiled gently, though there was sadness in her eyes. "I'm fine, John, but you? You saved me, you saved us all." John frowned, confused. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm. "You didn't just act in the moment. You put yourself in harm's way to protect me. That is not something ordinary." John wanted to sit up, but the pain stopped him. He groaned softly and closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. "I didn't think about it. I just reacted. I couldn't let you die." "You didn't just protect me, John," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You saved my life. And now, according to Xilian tradition, you've earned something much more than just my thanks." John looked at her, still unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated. "In our culture, a life debt is a powerful thing. It cannot be ignored. The person who saves the life of a royal, especially someone like M.I.'s, entitled to more than just words. A bond, a connection that cannot be broken." John furrowed his brow. "A bond?" he asked, confused. "But I'm just a soldier. I don't want anything." "That is not for you to decide," Lyra said gently. "It is a matter of honor, and it is deeply rooted in our customs. You've given me your life, John, and now I must find a way to repay that debt. John swallowed hard, didn't understand what she meant. He wasn't interested in riches or power. All he wanted was to go back to his simple life as a soldier, serving his country, doing his job. He wasn't prepared for something as complicated as a life debt. I didn't do it for any reward, he said quietly. Lyra smiled, though the weight of her responsibility was clear in her expression. I know, but the life debt goes beyond personal will. It's about the future. It's about the bond between people, cultures, and even empires. And, John, she paused for a moment, it is about the future of the Zillion people. You have become part of that future. John stared at her, processing the words. His chest felt tight, and the reality of the situation started to sink in. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was now part of something far greater than himself, something that could change the course of both human and Zillion history. Later that day, Lyra called for a meeting with the Royal Council. She needed guidance. The council was made up of the highest-ranking Xylian officials, each with their own ideas about how things should be handled. Some of them believed that the life debt should be honored with a simple title, perhaps a seat on the council or a land grant. Others saw it as an opportunity to strengthen their ties with humanity. But not everyone agreed. As Lyra entered the room, all eyes turned to her. The tension was palpable. The council members were waiting for her decision, knowing that whatever she chose would have a lasting impact, Your Highness. One of the elders said, his voice respectful but firm, "We must take swift action. The life debt must be honored. It is the law." Lyra nodded. "I understand, Counselor, but I need your wisdom. What does this life debt truly mean for us? And how should we move forward?" The room fell silent as the council members exchanged uneasy glances. The tradition was clear, but the modern world was different. There were no easy answers. Finally, one of the younger council members spoke up. "You must treat it with the respect it deserves. This is an opportunity, Princess. You cannot ignore the strength of our bond with the humans. If we handle this carefully, it could be the key to a future of unity." She knew the weight of her decision. Her people were looking to her for leadership, and John, though he was still recovering, would be the center of whatever happened next, as she stood there. Her thoughts turned back to John. She had to find a way to honor his sacrifice and the bond that was now between them. But she knew that it wouldn't be easy. The life debt had started something that could never be undone, and it was only just beginning. The days after John's recovery passed in a blur. He had spent weeks in the Zillion medical bay, healing from the deep wound he had received while saving Princess Lyra. But now, as he stood in the quiet halls of the royal palace, his mind was far from rest. There was something troubling him, something he couldn't ignore. Lyra had been kind to him, offering him respect and assistance throughout his recovery. But now that he was awake, the life debt weighed heavily on both of them. He had saved her life, but now he was bound by a tradition he didn't understand. The Xylian people were insistent on honoring it, and Lyra had promised that she would repay it. But John didn't know what that meant for him or his future. John had spent most of his days in the palace, trying to keep himself busy. He had trained with Zillion soldiers, learning their ways of combat, and had even been given a place among their ranks. But all of that felt like a distraction from the real problem. The more time he spent with Lyra and the Xelian leaders, the more he realized that this bond was more complicated than he had first imagined. One evening, as the sun began to set over the palace gardens, Lyra invited John to join her for a walk. She had been distant lately, her thoughts clouded with the responsibilities of her position.
Oh.
John could sense the tension in her as they strolled through the vibrant, alien landscape, surrounded by flowers that seemed to glow in the dimming light. "John," Lyra began, her voice soft but serious, "I've been thinking about the life debt and what it means for you." John stopped walking and turned to face her. He knew where this was going. "Lyra, I told you before, I don't want anything from you. I did what anyone would do in my place." Lyra shook her head. "It's not that simple. According to our traditions, I am bound to repay you in a way that is beyond simple thanks. You saved my life, and now I must make sure that you are honored. For it, the Xylian people are watching, and they expect me to keep my word." John frowned, feeling the weight of her words. "What do you mean by that? What do they expect?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. "The Xelian Council has decided that the life debt must be repaid with more than just words or titles. They believe that your actions are a sign of something greater, something that could bring our two species closer together." John's stomach twisted. "Closer together? What does that mean?" Lyra sighed, her gaze falling to the ground. "It means that I must offer you a position of power, a role among our people. I don't know how to explain it. You are now seen as someone of great importance to the future of the Xelian Empire." John shook his head in disbelief. "I'm just a soldier. I want power or any title. I'm here to do my job, nothing more." "I understand," Lyra said, her voice filled with empathy. "But this is not something I can change. It is the way of our people. When someone saves the life of a royal, they are given something in return, something that shows the depth of their sacrifice. It's a tradition that has been followed for centuries." John ran a hand through his hair. Frustrated. "I didn't do it for any of this. Just wanted to make sure you were safe." Lyra looked at him with understanding, but there was also a sadness in her eyes. "I know, John, and I am forever grateful to you. But now we must figure out what to do next. The Council is eager to honor you, but I don't know how you will fit into this. You are not Xylian, and you don't think like we do." They continued walking in silence for a moment, the tension between them growing. John couldn't help but feel trapped. He had never asked for this. He had never imagined that his life would become so complicated because of one act of bravery. As they walked, Lyra spoke again. "The Council wants you to take a leadership role in the military. They believe that your experience as a human soldier will be invaluable in the coming conflicts. There are forces in the galaxy who want to take advantage of the Xelian Empire's current instability. If you join us, we will be stronger together." John stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. "What do you mean instability?" Lyra's face darkened. "There are factions who oppose the current royal family. They see our alliances with the humans as weakness. There are whispers of rebellion and war. If we don't act quickly, the Xelian Empire could fall into chaos." John felt a chill run down his spine. "I had no idea things were that bad." Lyra nodded. "The situation is delicate. Council believes that your experience and strength will help us face the challenges ahead, but that's not all. They believe that you are the key to solidifying our bond with the humans. They want you to represent us in the galaxy, to lead the charge for unity." John stared at her in shock. He'd never considered himself a leader, especially not of an entire empire. "Lyra, I don't know if I can do that. I'm just a soldier. I don't belong in the middle of all this politics." Lyra stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. "John, you have already proven yourself more than any title or position could ever express. You saved my life. Now you must decide. Will you help us, or will you walk away?" John took a deep breath, his mind racing. The weight of the decision felt overwhelming. He had never wanted to be part of something so grand. He had never asked for power, for responsibility. But he knew that his choices now could affect not only his future, but the future of two entire species. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Lyra smiled softly, her hand brushing his arm.
You
Don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to try. We can do this together, John. You are not alone. John's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that his life would never be the same. The choice before him was daunting, but one thing was clear: he couldn't run from it. The bond between him and Lyra, and the fate of the Xelian Empire, had already been sealed. The days that followed were filled with difficult decisions. Aldan was still processing everything that had happened to Life Debt. The role he was now expected to play in the Xelian Empire, and the pressure that Lyra was under. She had asked him to join her people, to stand by her side, but John wasn't sure if he was the right person for the job. He had always been a soldier, trained to follow orders, not to lead nations or empires. Despite his uncertainty, John couldn't ignore the growing bond between him and Lyra. The more time they spent together, the more their connection deepened. Lyra had always been kind and respectful, but there was something different now. The life debt between them had formed a unique relationship, a bond that wasn't just about honor, but about trust, respect, and something more. One afternoon, Lyra called John to her private quarters. She had been busy with the Royal Council and various diplomatic meetings, but she had found time to talk with him. John arrived at her quarters, hesitating for a moment before entering. He still didn't know what to expect from their conversations. Lyra was seated by a large window, looking out at the lush landscape of the palace grounds. When she saw John enter, she smiled softly and gestured for him to sit beside her. "I've been thinking, John," she began, her voice serious yet warm, "about the future of our people, and about you." John sat down across from her, his gaze drifting toward the garden outside. "What about me?" he asked, still unsure of what role he could play in all of this. "You have already proven yourself more than I could have ever imagined," Lyra said, her eyes meeting his. "You saved my life, and now you are more than just a soldier. Are part of something much greater. The Xelian people look to you now. They see you as a symbol of hope, of unity between our worlds." John shook his head. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want to be a symbol or a leader. I just did what I thought was right." Lyra nodded, understanding his reluctance. "I know, but sometimes fate doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes we have to step up even when we don't feel ready." John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I'm ready to lead. I'm not even sure if I want to." Lyra reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "You don't have to do it alone, John. I'm here. The council is here, and we will guide you through it. You don't have to make all the decisions by yourself." John looked at her hand on his, feeling the warmth of her touch. It was comforting, but it also reminded him of the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. He didn't want to disappoint her or the Xylian people, but he wasn't sure he could live up to the expectations that had suddenly been thrust upon him. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly, his voice heavy with doubt. "I'm just a soldier. I'm not meant for this." Lyra's expression softened and she squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to be perfect, John. No one expects you to be. But you have something that none of us can teach. Perspective that's unique. You see things differently. You fought battles. You've made sacrifices. It makes you stronger than any title or position ever could." John didn't reply. He was still unsure, still struggling with the idea of leading an entire species. But as he looked at Lyra, he saw the sincerity in her eyes, saw the trust she had placed in him, and it made him want to try, even if he didn't feel ready. "I don't want to fail you," he said finally, his voice quiet but determined. "You won't," Lyra replied softly. "We'll face everything together, step by step, I promise." As the days passed, John spent more time training with the Xelian warriors, learning their tactics and strategies. He had become a key figure in the Xelian military, though he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a role he wasn't meant for. But every time he trained with them, he felt a little more comfortable. He began to understand the Xelian way of life, their culture, their values. He began to respect them, not just as allies, but as people with a rich history and a deep sense of honor. Lyra continued to guide him, offering advice and wisdom whenever he needed it. She never pressured him to accept his new role, but she always made sure he knew that she believed in him. Slowly, John began to feel a sense of purpose, even if it wasn't what he had expected. One evening, as the sun set over the palace, Lyra invited John to a private dinner in the royal gardens. It was a small, quiet affair, just the two of them, away from the politics and pressures of the palace. They sat under the stars, enjoying a simple meal, and for the first time in weeks, John felt at peace. "Tell me, John," Lyra said, as she took a sip of her drink. "What do you want from all of this? I know you never asked for any of it, but I want to understand. What do you hope for?" John thought for a moment. Looking up at the stars above them, "I don't know. I never thought about the future. I just thought I'd serve my time, do my duty, and then move on. But now I see that there's more at stake. It's not just about me anymore, it's about both our worlds." Lyra nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Yes, it is. We will face it together. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." John felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this. He had Lyra and the zillion people standing with him. And maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. He wasn't sure how it would all play out, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a place in this new world he was a part of. As the night wore on, they sat in silence, looking out over the gardens. The future was uncertain, but for now, in this moment, everything felt right. The calm that had settled over the palace was about to be shattered. John had become accustomed to his new life among the Zillions, but even in moments of peace, the tension in the air never fully disappeared. Lyra's presence always brought him a sense of calm, but the knowledge that the Zillion Empire was facing unknown dangers kept his mind occupied. One evening, as they were walking through the palace corridors, Lyra stopped suddenly. Her expression had changed, no longer filled with the quiet determination John had grown used to. Instead, it was replaced with worry, something much deeper. "What's wrong?" John asked, noticing the change in her demeanor. Lyra looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We've been hearing rumors. Whispers from the far reaches of the galaxy. The Drakari are mobilizing." John furrowed his brow. The Drakari were a fierce, warlike species that had been a constant threat to the Zillion Empire for centuries. They were known for their brutal tactics and their ruthless desire for control over the galaxy. But despite their constant threats, they had never dared to directly challenge the Zillions until now. "The Drakari," John repeated, his tone heavy with concern. "Are they coming for us?" Lyra nodded. "They've been quietly building their forces, waiting for the right moment. And now, I fear they think that moment is here." John's heart raced. He had faced many battles before, but this was different. The Drakari weren't just any enemy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and their attacks were swift and unforgiving. The thought of them attacking the Xylian Empire sent a chill down his spine. "What do we do?" John asked, his voice steady, but filled with uncertainty. Lyra's eyes met his. "We fight. We stand together, as we always have. But I need you, John. The Council wants to see you lead our forces. They believe your experience will be key to our survival." John shook his head. "I'm just a soldier. I don't know how to lead an empire into battle." Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "You've already led us. You saved me. And now you have the opportunity to save us all." John's stomach tightened. He couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. The Xylian Empire was in danger, and he had a role to play in protecting it. But could he really do this? Could he lead them against an enemy like the Drakari? Before he could respond, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The Drakari had launched an attack on one of the Xylian border colonies. It was the first move in what was likely to be a larger campaign. The time for hesitation was over. John and Lyra rushed to the war room where the Royal Council had gathered. The atmosphere was tense as the council members discussed their next steps. The colony was under attack, and if the Drakari succeeded, it would be a devastating blow to the Xylian Empire's defenses. "We cannot allow this to continue," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We must act quickly. We must defend our people." One of the council members, an older Xylian named Terran, spoke up. "We need every available ship and soldier at the border. If we do not show strength now, the Drakari will see it as an opportunity to strike again. Jon felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it. The moment he had feared was here. The Xylian Empire needed him, and it needed him now. "I'll lead the charge," Jon said, his voice filled with determination. "May not be a leader in the eyes of your people, but I know how to fight, and I will fight to protect this empire." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of admiration and concern. "I'll stand with you, Jon. You won't be alone." The council members nodded in agreement. The decision had been made. The Xylian Empire would fight to protect their people, and Jon would be at the forefront of that fight. The battle began. The next day, the sky was filled with the roar of Xylian ships as they flew towards the border colony. Jon was aboard one of the ships, leading a squadron of Xylian warriors. They were preparing for a fight that could determine the fate of the entire empire. As they approached the colony, Jon's heart raced. The Drakari ships were already in orbit, their dark silhouettes cutting through the sky like a storm. The battle was about to begin. "We can't let them take the colony," Jon said, his voice steady over the comms. "All ships prepare for combat. This is our home. We will protect it." The ships scattered as the battle raged in the skies above the colony. The Drakari ships were faster and more heavily armed, but the Xylian forces had the advantage of numbers and experience. Jon's squadron fought with everything they had, pushing the Drakari back from the colony's atmosphere. On the ground, Lyra commanded the Xylian ground forces, coordinating with Jon's ships from her command center. The battle on the surface was fierce, with explosions lighting up the landscape and the sound of weapons echoing through the air. Jon's squadron led the charge, dodging enemy fire and striking back with precision. He could see the Drakari ships beginning to retreat, but there was still more work to be done. They had to destroy the Drakari's main fleet before they could regroup and strike again. As the battle raged on, Tarman's determination grew stronger. This wasn't just about the life debt anymore. This was about the future of the Xylian Empire, about the people he had come to care for. He wasn't just fighting for Lyra, he was fighting for the galaxy, for the lives of everyone who depended. On the Xylian Empire's strength, the Drakari forces began to falter. Their ships were scattered, and their ground forces were retreating. It was clear that the Xylian forces had gained the upper hand. With one final push, Jon's squadron delivered the finishing blow to the Drakari fleet, forcing them to retreat into the shadows of the galaxy. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Jon stood on the bridge of his ship, watching as the last of the Drakari forces vanished into the darkness of space. He felt a sense of relief, but he knew that this was just the beginning. Xylian Empire had won this battle, but many more challenges lay ahead. As the dust settled, Lyra contacted him over the comms. "You did it, Jon," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You saved us all." Jon smiled, though he knew the fight was far from over. "We did it, Lyra, together." The days following the battle were filled with both relief and reflection. The Drakari had been driven back, but their defeat was only the beginning of a long war that was bound to test both the Xylian Empire and the strength of the Alliance. Between humans and Xylians, the galaxy was a dangerous place, and though the Drakari had been repelled for now, the threat of their return lingered in the shadows. Jon had done what he had set out to do. He had helped defend the Xylian Empire, saving countless lives in the process. His role had shifted from a mere soldier to a leader, someone who had earned respect not only from the Xylians, but also from the human forces that had joined the battle. Yet despite his success, Jon still felt uncertain. He had never asked for this responsibility, and now it felt like a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. One evening, after a long day of meetings and briefings, Jon returned to the royal palace. Lyra had insisted he take the night off to rest, but his mind was too restless. As he walked through the quiet halls, he thought about the future. The Xylian Empire was stronger now, thanks to the human forces and the unity between their two peoples. But Jon knew that this fragile peace would not last forever. There were always new threats, new challenges, As he made his way to the palace gardens, he saw Lyra standing by the fountain, gazing out into the distance. She was wearing a simple dress, her usual royal attire replaced by something more comfortable. John had come to appreciate these quiet moments with her. She was no longer just the princess he had sworn to protect. She had become someone he trusted, someone he admired. Lyra turned when she heard his footsteps. She smiled softly, her expression warm, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "John," she said, her voice quiet, "I was hoping you'd come." John walked over to her, stopping just a few feet away. "I couldn't sleep, too much on my mind." Lyra nodded, understanding. "I feel the same way." She paused for a moment before speaking again. "The battle we fought, it was just the beginning. Now Drakari may be gone for now, but there will always be someone else. And the Xelian Empire, well, we've only just begun to rebuild." John looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. He could see the weight of her words. He had known it all along, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel more real. "You've done more than I could ever ask for," Lyra continued, her voice soft. "My life, you've helped defend our people. And I don't know how to thank you." John frowned. "Lyra, you don't have to thank me. I did what any soldier would do. It's my duty." She shook her head, her eyes filled with sincerity. "No, John, it's more than that. You've shown me that duty is more than just following orders. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about sacrifice, and you've taught me that." John felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, especially not to someone as powerful as Lyra, but the bond they had formed through the life dead had changed them both. They had learned from each other in ways that neither could have anticipated. Lyra stepped closer, her expression serious. "I want you to know that the life debt is something I don't take lightly. You saved my life, and now I will repay it. But it's not just about what the council wants or what tradition demands. It's about me. I owe you, John, and I will honor that debt in every way I can." John looked at her, his heart pounding. Had heard her speak of the life debt before, but this time her words carried a weight that he couldn't ignore. He had never wanted anything in return for saving her life. He had only acted because he cared for her, because he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. But now, she was offering him something he hadn't expected. "I never wanted any of this, Lyra," John said quietly. "I didn't do it for a title or a position. I did it because I couldn't let you die." "I know," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "But you've changed everything. You've changed me. And that's what the life debt is about, John. It's not about a single act of bravery. It's about what comes after. It's about the bond that's formed when someone gives everything for another." John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to walk away, to escape from the responsibilities that were now attached to him. But another part of him, something deeper, wanted to stay, to be there for Lyra and the Xelian people. "I don't know if I can live up to all this, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm not a leader. I'm just a soldier." Smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're more than that, John. You've already led us through the hardest part. The rest is just following the path we've already started. And I'll be by your side every step of the way." John looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone, wasn't facing this battle by himself. Together, they would find a way forward. The night was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. As they stood there side by side, John realized that the life debt had become more than just an obligation. It had become a bond of promise between two people, two worlds, that would last through whatever challenges lay ahead. Lyra turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've both made sacrifices, John, but together we'll build something stronger, something worth fighting for." John nodded, his heart full. "I'm with you, Lyra, always." And as the stars shone brightly above them, John knew that whatever the future held, he would face it not as a soldier, but as someone who had found a new purpose, fighting not just for the Xelian Empire, but for the woman he had come to care for, the woman he had saved, and the life they had built together.